in Atlanta. They're just little things like that, expectations that don't match reality. And another reality of ministry is as soon as you plan something, you know that's when something happened, right? And so that's why a Saturday night special is a real dangerous place to live because something could even happen on Saturday night. So if you're one of those people who just kind of push everything up to the last minute, you are compounding your own stress and adding to your own possibilities of burnout. I made a commitment to myself that whatever I have to have done will be finished 2 days before I need it. That way I don't have to stress. So inadequate preparation. Now we all know we didn't faked it until we made it, right? But you still feel bad when you do that. Have you ever preached a sermon and you know you really didn't prepare and you cheated the people out of a good word? And so that adds to your sense of stress, your sense of burnout. So again, that's where time management is important because when you don't allot enough time, then you don't feel adequately prepared. Another common cause of burnout is when your mission and vision does not match that of the congregation. Most of you have, I think just about everybody been to a new church or got a new assignment and you just gun ho. Oh yeah, I'm gonna do this, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this. And folks looking at you like, what? We ain't with that. And if you keep charging ahead, who was that said the other day, the proverb, if you are leading and nobody's following, you just taking a walk. We got a lot of folks who are pastors and they just taking a walk because they've left the people behind. I don't care how good your idea is, if you do not have buy-in and form an alliance with your congregation, you are going to be burned out because you'll feel like you're just spinning your wheels and accomplishing nothing. And part of ministry is not for you to shine, but it's for the congregation to shine and grow. So sometimes we have to divest ourselves of the things that we are attached to, the visions that we are attached to, and grasp the vision that the people have and help them grow that vision. In other words, meet the people where they are. Really important. Another counterproductive, self-soothing coping strategies. A lot of folks, and a minute ago I said not everything for stress management, because a lot of folks employ self-soothing methods that are unproductive. Substance abuse, drugs, alcohol, food, all of those can have a detrimental effect. Glass of wine every once in a while, I don't have a problem with that. But if you need a glass of wine every day to wind down, you might ask yourself, what could be an alternative? So think about that. Other behaviors, sexual misconduct. Now, a lot of times when I bring up the issue of sexual misconduct, everybody gets all pious. Oh, that would never be me. And then I say, and you're the one I'm worried about. Because we have to acknowledge that we are all sexual beings and we tend to be attracted to certain people, gravitate. We like people who like us. And if you are not aware, then you can get into relationships and situations that may compromise your integrity. You always, as the leader, have to be aware that it is your responsibility to maintain boundaries. Not only just sexual in terms of physical contact, but even in terms of intimate and emotional contact. Yes, they do. And so we have to really be aware that that will lead to a compromising situation. Gambling. I know a lot of ministers that are gambling addicts, and eventually they start borrowing money from the congregation, and then they start borrowing money from the church treasurer, and it becomes very problematic because it's a self-soothing activity. Shopping. Well, I like to call it retail therapy because I like to do it. But sometimes I'm aware that it's an unhealthy coping. That I didn't come in this store because I needed anything. I came in this store because I'm frustrated and I need to feel good about myself. So I'm going to go buy myself something. Now, once or twice, that's not bad. But if you're doing that chronically, eventually it's going to get you in trouble because you're living beyond your means and your bills are going to exceed your income and it's going to become problematic. Or your collection will exceed your closet capacity. Any other risky behaviors, when you find yourself indulging in risky behavior that puts you at risk, adrenaline activities, yeah. Mhm. Well, I don't want to denigrate those activities because they are, for some people, they like that. But here's the thing to think about. So I don't remember what year it was, 92, 94, somewhere. My children were young then. They were maybe like 6 and 8. And so the ACPE conference is in Colorado, and I'm going to go skiing. I knew a lady who skied, and so I borrowed all her little ski outfits and stuff. And I go to Colorado with my suitcases, and I'm looking good. And I was getting ready to take a ski lesson, and then it occurred to me, if I break my leg, who's going to take care of my children and me? Because I was a single parent. So I said, I sat there and drank my hot chocolate in my ski outfit. But risky is when you put at risk your ability to function. So nothing wrong with going out and having a good night out with family, with friends and all that. But if you got to perform a funeral the next morning, that's going to compromise your ability to function. And you may ask yourself, why am I doing that? Am I anxious about this funeral? Because if it's a funeral of someone you cared about, you may be suppressing that. If it's a funeral like somebody died by suicide, you may not want to have to deal with that. A lot of times we choose to do things as alternatives to addressing what the real issue is. So these are some of the common causes of burnout. Now, I ran across something just the other day that I'm going to stick in this slide because it said that there are some particular leadership styles that also lead to burnout. And I just want to share those with you because this may sound familiar. So a lot of folks are task-oriented. You're a real task-oriented person where the task exceeds getting the task. Yes. Then you may be at risk for burnout because when you're a taskmaster, getting the work done becomes more important. And so you tend to push yourself and you push others really, really hard. And again, as I said, if you keep pushing and running your machine, you're eventually going to burn out. Micromanager. Are you a controller? Do you have to have your hand on everything? Micromanaging conveys a lack of trust of other people. Well, you shouldn't give untrustworthy people jobs to do. But if you give somebody a job to do, give them adequate instruction and let them do it their way so they can grow. But if you've ever worked for a micromanager, you know that is not a pleasant task. Competitor. If you're constantly comparing yourself to everybody else and to other folks, it's exhausting and you will burn out because you'll be constantly trying to be something that God did not intend you to be. Your gifts will make room for you. And so don't compare your gifts to somebody else's gifts. And then the last one, perfectionists. A lot of folks who are perfectionists actually end up not getting much done because they are afraid if it's not perfect, I have failed. I had to learn how to send out a letter with a typo on it as opposed to doing the letter all over again. Are you horrified? mean, if I type the letter and then I see a typo, and then I realize, but it's already in the envelope, and I got to go to the next thing, it just has a typo. That does not mean I'm a failure. But a lot of us feel that way. I can't tell you how many pastors are still beating themselves up this week about the Christmas sermon they preached. Yeah. I encourage everybody to see experiences that you feel are less than as learning opportunities and keep moving forward because you cannot undo them. All right, let's move ahead quickly. I do want to also mention, as we talk about burnout, compassion fatigue, because I think this is really the moment that we're in. Compassion fatigue. This was a term coined back in the late 60s when, with the emergence of emergency medicine, and when emergency medicine and became a lot more formalized in our culture. But it simply refers to just a process where you're exposed to a rapid or continuous succession of activities that call on you to demonstrate compassion and empathy. And at some point, it just becomes too much. It's just one thing after another. And I think right now, this is where many of us are living because COVID was such an event. By the time we figured out what to do, something else happened. And things just continue to compound. And the rate of our culture is such that it seems like we just live from one traumatic event to another. There's the shooting, and then next week there's the flood, and then the next week there's the fire, and then the next week there's the death of our lead person in church, and then the next week our grandmama gets sick and dies, and then the next week it's just one thing after another. And actually, compassion fatigue. It's a special kind of burnout that you have to recognize. It's not that you have neglected your duties, it's that your duties have just come upon you so rapidly and so continuously that you haven't had a chance to breathe in between. Now, compassion fatigue can be a little tricky because it's not just what you experience, but it's vicarious or even secondary trauma that you experience. And so I'll be honest with y'all, there are some days I don't watch the news. I heard late about Dexter King, because that was one of my not watching the news days. Because as an empath, if I see a story about, I absorb all that. And the next thing you know, I'm just depleted and I'm like wondering why. So if you have to really monitor how much you allow yourself to be exposed. It's like anybody clean their bathroom with ammonia. So you on a sponge and you can clean your bathroom and you can smell the ammonia and you can tolerate it. But if you put too much, you get overwhelmed. That's how it is with trauma. When you're exposed to too much trauma in too much rapid succession, whether it's your own trauma that you're experiencing or is happening in your community or something that you're just hearing about and reading about. So be a good monitor of your exposure to trauma. Now, here are some things to be on the lookout for, both for compassion fatigue and burnout. When you start feeling helpless, when nothing feels fun, good, positive anymore, when you become cynical, when your anxiety increases, that probably means that you've got some mental or emotional fatigue or burnout. When you may find yourself saying things like, oh, what's the point? These folk ain't gonna do nothing. That's a helpless statement. You might want to check, where's that coming from? What is that all about? Physically, when you can't sleep, if you sleep, 6 hours and then suddenly for some reason you can't sleep, self-reflection, figure out what's going on. Or you sleeping too much. You don't have any energy to do anything. You can barely move. You don't want to be bothered. Your body is telling you something. You lose your appetite. Or you start craving things that you don't usually eat. What is your body telling you? And then on the spiritual side, when you have a loss of meaning or loss of focus, you just don't get enthusiastic, getting up, going to the church, just like, oh Lord, I wish I didn't have to go. That's more than just about your frustration. This is your interior spirit telling you something is amiss. When you feel negativity, when you feel a sense of hopelessness, when you're ready to write that resignation letter, dear Bishop, you can have this church back. Don't hit send. Sit with yourself and just make a list of what are all the things that have gotten me to this place. And then empower yourself first through prayer. I need to pray for these things. But then beyond that, what else do I need to do? Brother so-and-so is getting on my nerves. I need to sit down with that brother and talk to him about my expectations and how we can work better together. Because you are not helpless. All power that was in his hands has been given unto you. And so we have to really be good monitors of these symptoms that affect us mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Now, this is something, if you don't get anything else out of what I'm saying, remember this. Far too many ministers allow your pastoral identity to become your primary identity. You can advance the slide, I'm sorry. So here's the circle. All too often, we suppress our personhood and take on this mantle of clergy. And so wherever you go, I'm Reverend so-and-so. No, you're not, you Johnny. I'm Bishop, but I tell folks who've known me all my life, my first name is not Bishop, my name is Teresa. My job is Bishop. And we have to have the ability to help ourselves and others understand we are human. Somebody called me one night and they said, "What you doing, Bishop?" I said, "I'm frying fish." "You cook?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's Friday night. It's Friday night and I'm a black woman and I'm eating fish. And if there's food in my house, I have to go get it. And if my clothes go to the cleaners, I have to take them." And far too many of us suppress those. I was recently with bishops, and one of the bishop's spouses was complaining about her husband, the bishop, not taking out the trash. And I jokingly said, that's when you become bishop in the house, right? The bishop don't take out trash. And the wife said, "No, but my husband does." Because you are other things other than clergy. And so the circle on the right that says, yes, your clergy identity is just a subset of who you are as a person. And if you want to be effective in ministry, leaning into your personhood is really important. I like what Dr. Bryan said yesterday when she talked about we forget that, or this was her, that we forget that Jesus, we get so caught up in the deification of Jesus that we forget he was fully human, but he showed us his humanity over and over and over, hanging out with his friends, just having dinner, just chilling, teaching, traveling, just being a person. And many of us as clergy, we don't even know how to be people. We don't know how to be people. And it takes a toll not only on you, but also on your families. And so we wonder why a lot of pastors' children quit going to church. My sons will go to church if I invite them and ask them, but they say often, "Oh, I had enough church when I was growing up." But at any rate, I like this, next slide. I like this graphic Oh, because what it says to us in real life, if this outer blue circle is who we are as a whole, we have a whole lot of other identities within us. And the reason I like this graphic is because notice those inner circles change and shift. And that's the reality. Your responsibilities as a parent, for example, change and shift as your children move from being toddlers to being school age to being teenagers. And you can't treat your teenagers the same way you treated them as toddlers. You have to shift and move. And so while your toddlers may not understand time and may not understand why you're not picking them up from daycare, your teenagers are going to notice that you are not coming to anything that involves them because you're too busy at the church. And then as family changes, I just mentioned my mother, I've had to make some adjustments to my schedule and my time to accommodate being available to her. And then community, friends. We have to really live in this space where our personal identity contains all of these other identities. And that's why I said early on, addressing your personal identity, dealing with your personal history, your personal wounds, your personal gaps, your personal hurts are so important because as a person, that's the container for all of these other roles. And if you've got holes and gaps in it, then you will not be able to be efficient and effective and present in the ways in which you probably desire to be. The one thing that I like to say to pastors about this whole notion of friends and community, everybody needs a friend that is not a pastor. If all your friends are church folk, you are setting yourself up to be at work all the time. Because I don't care how often we say we're going to get together and just have lunch. If we both in the church, we're going to end up talking about church. So I got me some friends who could care less about church. And so we talk about what's on sale at Macy's. And we talk about our grandchildren. Yeah. So have some friends who can bring some other perspectives of life into you and breathe that into existence. And then in the community, be active in your community, but don't always be the leader. Many of us are active in the community, but we the president of the Ministers Alliance, we the chair of the XYZ committee, the scholarship committee. We are active, but we're constantly, it just becomes more work. And so we're not even expanding our capacity just to live. And I'm not saying to hide that the fact that you're a minister, but sometimes you need to let folks know, I'm just here because I'm a grandparent. I'm just here because I'm a parent. And so no, I won't share that. I just want to be Johnny's mama or daddy. That will enrich your life in some way when you have the ability to take that heavy mantle of ministry off and just be a person. Just be. All right, hurrying on. Let's see. I think I'm about a little more than half. So here's what you need. Physically, taking care of your physical temple. The body is indeed a temple that deserves all of the care and tenderness that you can give it because you only have one body. You can't trade this one in like you can trade in your car. And many of us grew up in households that really did not teach us a lot about health, nutrition, because we grew up in homes that were simply in survival mode. One of the battles I have with my mother right now, who is a child of the Depression, is that she wants to eat souse and pork rinds and bologna. That's the stuff she grew up on. And it's not good for her. But she grew up on it. And many of us have grown up with some habits that don't serve us well as we age. And so getting adequate, doing stress reduction, getting adequate sleep, nutrition, and exercise. Now, I'm sure most of the Black women in here can identify with this because I grew up during the press and curl days. And there was stuff that we couldn't do as little girls because you're going to sweat your hair out. And so I really didn't learn about the value of exercise until I became an adult and started wondering why my knees hurt. So exercise, pushing through old messages that compromise and embracing new habits that promote health and well-being, health and wellness care. Now, this is expensive, and a lot of folks don't have good health care, but you need to see a medical professional at least once a year. You need to go to a dentist at least once a year. Twice a year for cleaning is really what's recommended. If you have other issues, there are far too many folks who are dying or compromising their health because they don't even realize they're sick. They call diabetes the silent killer. Before the symptoms of diabetes become debilitating, the disease has already progressed to a point where there's very little that can be done to mitigate the consequences. So, taking care and doing health and wellness. And too many of us, got a lot of, I like homeopathic medicine, but sometimes you just need some real medicine to deal with what's going on. And then last, physically as well as mentally, you need to be engaged and stimulated. If all you're doing is sitting behind your computer and the only time you walk is from your office to the pulpit, your body and your mind are not stimulated enough. You need to be out and about doing. I like what she said. She just goes out walking. Just if you want to get stimulated, just go out walking and look at nature. Look at the different trees and the birds, and just look at the different colors. And I like that movie, The Color Purple. Celie says, I think God gets mad when we see the color purple and we don't even notice. God has given us a whole world and we just in our cars driving. Not even looking, not stimulate. Read something, y'all. That's not a problem here. Y'all reading a lot of stuff, but but read things that get your interest, that pique your interest. Often, I encourage you, find something to read that's not related to ministry. You'll be surprised at how it enlivens your creativity about the text. So you need these things physically and mentally, emotionally and socially. You need a safe space where you can tell your truths to a friend, where you don't have to be Reverend Dr. So and so, but you can just be your whole transparent self and say, I don't know what I'm doing. The church is trying to do this, and I don't have a clue. Or where you can just talk about how angry you are, that you left, that you got moved from the church you loved to this other church where these folk are just headaches. You need a safe space to be honest and open. You need boundaries. Some of you, I mentioned that 24/7. My phone, where is it? I don't sometimes, but my cell phone, 9 p.m. click off. Took me a long time to get there because I worried. I was one of them. I could probably qualified as a helicopter parent, but one day my son was in Rome on a trip with his students, and I'm pacing and worrying about him, and I'm thinking, well, if something happened, what could I do? So I had to divest myself of feeling like I'm not that powerful. So if it happens after 9 o'clock, I'm gonna meet it in the morning at 8 when I turn my phone on because I'm gonna have me a good night's sleep. But too many of us have this Messiah complex. That might not work for you, but you should have some boundaries. You should not be available 24/7. There should be some time that you communicate to your congregation that is devoted to your study time. This is your off day. This is my day with my family. Now, obviously, sometimes things do happen during those, but if you answer your phone every time it rings 7 days a week, your mind is never getting shut off and you are not going to be able to bear the burdens because you're going to be picking up so much tidbits along the way. Distractions. Everything is not urgent. Might be urgent to them. I was pastoring a church and working as a chaplain at the same time. And church folks called me one day. Pastor, can you come by the church this afternoon when you get off from work? I'm like, well, sure. What's up? Oh, we'll show you when you get here. I'm thinking something that happened to the building or, something drastic. I walk in, come on downstairs, fellowship hall. Okay, what's up? Which tablecloth which color tablecloth should we use for the harvest tea? This beige one or this ivory one or this eggshell one? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That actually happened. Now, if it had been choose between blue and red, I may not have been as upset. But beige, ivory, and eggshell, I think that's the day I decided to go into chaplaincy full time. But see, those are the kinds of things that was important to them. And while it didn't make me any difference, I just picked one and said, use that one. But if you just kind of absorb all that, eventually you're just going to burn out. Let's see, boundaries. So you got to have some boundaries. Work-play balance. What's the last thing you did just for fun? Somebody went to the dog park. Oh, all right. What kind of dog you have? A chocolate lab named Nat Turner. I bet that's cool. Can't you see him out there? Hey, Nat Turner, come on. Yes. Clarence, went to the movies. Yes, in the back. Went scuba diving. Musical theater. How many of you, if you're brave enough, have gone at least 7 days without having any fun? Anybody? All right. Y'all got some work to do. You ought to put fun on your calendar at least once a week. Something. Dancing, jumping, something. I do line dancing at the senior center. Wobble. It is so much fun. And it's exercise too. So anyway, a support system. Who can you call when there's a crisis in your life? If you don't know who that person is, you need to begin to think about identifying your own support system. Who can you call at 2:00 in the morning when you can't sleep because you got some troubling news about a loved one? Support system. And last, spiritual grounding. Now, the thing about ministry is you get exposed to so much that it's easy to lose your spiritual grounding. When you're there with that family and they just had the new baby and they took the baby home and the baby got sick and now they've been told the baby is dying, that can shake your own spiritual foundation. When bad things happen to good people, when somebody breaks into church and steals, who steals from God's house? It can shake your spiritual foundation. So staying spiritually grounded is not, again, one and done. It's something you have to continuously do to stay spiritually fit for the ministry. I recommend meditation. I have a hard time sitting still. But you don't have to do like 30 minutes of meditation. Do 5 minutes if you can. Just sit still and just. A lot of us are good at talking to God, but we have trouble sitting still long enough to listen what God is saying. Praying. Do you have a prayer life outside of when you're leading worship or leading prayer at church? Do you have your own prayer discipline where you're studying the word and praying, listening for God? Theological reflection. Now, I know you all are in a doctoral program, so your time really is consumed. But there ought to be sometimes you just sitting and asking yourself some theological questions. What do I believe about the purpose of suffering? This doesn't have anything to do with preparing a sermon or addressing anybody's issue. It just has to do with your own spiritual increasing your theological depth. You'd be surprised. Sometimes God puts stuff in your spirit for you to wrestle with because he knows what's coming down the road. And then last, preparation and study. I don't know, how you manage that, but if you don't have a good routine for doing your own preparation and study, a good space to do that, time to do that, resources that are at hand, this is all a part of your own spiritual well-being, because you cannot drive the ministry car without gas. And the word is gas. Your spiritual connection with God is your gas. Your ability to think theologically, your ability to have a word that doesn't require you to have a Bible and go through it. Because sometimes people will ask you to minister to them, and you just went in the store to buy some bread. But you got to have your theological, spiritual toolbox equipped to respond. All right, so these are some things, and what I'm really advocating is that we see ourselves as whole beings, that we're not just feeding your minds through this D-Men program and feeding your theological, but you're also feeding your spirit socially, emotionally, relationally, so that you're living the abundant life that God has for you. I hate it when pastors, had a pastor once and he was just in tears because he had to retire, because he had no life outside of pastoring, had no interest, didn't have any relationships except those in the church. And so retiring became painful. I got a whole bunch of stuff I want to do when I retire. I don't know about you. All right. Other forms of holistic wellness. Socially, you need quality connections. Hopefully you got some friends that have been friends for a lifetime, friends for a season, friends for a reason. Hopefully you're finding meaning in your vocational work. Financially, this is a big one for clergy. You do need a living wage and and to keep your debt manageable. And it's real easy. I'm CME, many of you all are AME, but it's real easy to say, oh, well, I'm gonna have to put in to pay the budget. And it compromises your financial stability. And this is a serious problem that as the Black church, we're not taking serious enough, that pastors need a living wage. We have far too many pastors who can't do their pastoral work because they have to have secular jobs, because of folk grumbling because they got to give you $150 every week. And so if you're having some financial issues, again, find a safe space where you can talk about that, get some ideas and some insight about how to turn that around or how to manage your debt better. I went for years without cable. My children never knew we didn't have cable because I would record the cartoons that they saw on network TV. And when they got tired of watching network TV, I popped one of them VHS tapes in. They thought it was a new show. Environmental. We also underestimate this one. Many of us are not living in safe communities, and it is creating traumatic. If you're living in a parsonage, I know sometimes churches are not good landlords, and we're so compassionate. We just put up with, the toilet don't halfway flush, and there's mold in there. I know some pastors who right now to this day have medical problems because of living in a house with mold. And then, of course, we're exposed to all the violence that's in our communities. And you have to acknowledge that, not that you can change that, but hopefully you could be an advocate for change. But how then do you protect yourself and minister to your own self so that that does not create a liability for you? So you're in a dangerous neighborhood and you're scared to go to the church at night because you might get shot. I mean, that's a reality. So you might have to figure out something else. where to have Bible study or how to do this or how to do various things, or have a cadre of people who will go with you so you're not ever by yourself. Just some realities. Now, self-care, this is winding up. Self-care, Dr. Brian said yesterday, is not selfish. It is not selfish to care for yourself. People who will try to guilt you into not taking care of yourself by saying you're being selfish generally are saying that because they don't like the changes they see, because it's calling on them to step up. Because as I said yesterday, the more you overfunction, somebody else gets to underfunction. And if you are overfunctioning, you should pause and say, who is underfunctioning because I'm picking up all the extra weight, because I'm carrying it all. And many of us are really, really good at carrying a lot of baskets. But that means somebody is not having the opportunity to grow. There's somebody that I am really, through my good deeds, depriving of the opportunity to utilize their gifts, to stretch themselves outside of their comfort zone. Yeah, that's it. And self-care equips us to serve others. When my children were little, and I was at Emory, I had a friend, colleague, and we would on Fridays do this we call it the call of the mall. And so we would leave work on Friday at 3:30 because I had to pick kids up by 6. And we just walk through the mall, have ice cream, get a soda. Because our children were little and because we got to deal with these kids for 2 days. So it was a way of equipping ourselves to be attentive and available for our children. And so many of us really just rush from one thing to another. And by the time we get to the third or fourth thing, we're depleted because we haven't even paused long enough to catch our breath in between events and activities. So learning how to pace yourself really is not just about preserving self, but it's about equipping you to be available for others. If you've ever done a series of home visits, and you go from one house to the next, you should pause before you go to the next house so you don't take what you absorbed in that other home into the next home. Or the same when doing hospital visits, because you'll start leaking, you'll start dripping on other folks, stuff that's not even for them. And then last, it values whole self. God did not just create you from the neck up. God created the whole self, and being attentive to the whole self, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually, is critical and important. So I want to end with this because I read this book recently and found it to be very helpful. I don't know if y'all can see it. Next slide. Sean Ginwright, Ginwright, has written a book called The Four Pivots. He is a sociologist. The Four Pivots: Reimagining Justice, Reimagining Ourselves. And through doing some social justice work, he began to wrestle with some of his own story and some of his own interior beliefs and attachments and things, and came up with this concept of, to really be a whole self, there's some pivots that are necessary in our lives. The first, he says, is we have to transition from lens to mirror. There is something about ministry that causes us to always be looking outside, looking at other folks, assessing the congregation. But Ginwright's premise is that we need to shift from always looking through the lens to looking in the mirror. That as we engage and entertain the needs of those that we are serving, we also need to look in the mirror at ourselves to really be honest and take an honest assessment of where we are in that moment. Because sometimes we are not in the space we need to be. Sometimes our own life circumstances are such that we're not the best person to be doing that thing. Your kids acting up and acting a fool and you want to kill them, you probably don't need to be doing teenage youth ministry right now. But you only come to that when you look in the mirror. So that's the first pivot, he says. The second pivot that Jen Wright says we have to make is from transactional to transformative. We live in a culture that's a very transactional culture. You do this for me, I'm going to get this in return. And we can approach our ministry that way by asking people to do things because we expect stuff in return. I acknowledge you, so now you're going to be loyal to me. Or I give you this opportunity, now you're going to do this. But we have to transform or transition from being transactional, thinking about what am I going to get in return, to thinking transformation. If I do this, what transformation can I help usher in? What transformation can I facilitate? So rather than expecting something in return, you're looking at what transformation I'm going to make in the life of this individual, what transformation can occur in the life of this congregation, because it's not about you. The ministry isn't about what you get, it's about what you leave once you move on, or what you give the people that they can take outside the door with them. So pivoting from transactional. Oh yeah, I'm gonna get Sister so-and-so to do that because she'll do a good job. No, you should be asking Sister so-and-so to do that because by her doing that, it will transform her self-doubt into confidence. That becomes the goal. You're helping her to flourish, not helping your program be successful. Then a third pivot he says we have to make is from problem to possibility. That there is a tendency when something unexpected happens for us to see it as a problem. Oh, Lord, here they come. Oh, Lord. To see it as a possibility. Here's an opportunity for me to do something that I've not had to face before. It's really changing our mindset and changing our attitude. And rather than seeing things as a problem and a negative, we see embedded within that the opportunity that God is giving us to serve in a different way, to use a different gift set, to bring in another set of folks who become a part of the community. So rather than seeing it as problem, see, folks will tell us about, Pastor, we got to do something about these homeless people sitting out here on the steps of the church. That's a problem. But you can turn that into a possibility and get your congregation to talk about how can we be better disciples and show the love of Jesus to the homeless in our community. It's no longer a problem, but a possibility for new ministry. And then the last, I like this one, hustle to flow. Oh, we are living in a grind culture. Living in a culture where it's get it done, get it done, get it done, get it done. I'm hustling, I'm grinding. Dr. Brian used that word flow. That we have to really cultivate through balance a sense of flow, where I'm flowing and not grinding. Because when you're flowing, you ever watch water flow and it encounters a rock or an obstacle, it just pivots and goes around. But so when you're grinding, you hit that wall, hit that obstacle, it's in the way. You got to get rid of it, as opposed to it becoming a part of. So moving from the sense of hustle to flow. And a lot of that has to do with how you manage your time and your stress. Because if you can't flow, if the deadline is in 24 hours and it's going to take you 48 hours, you can't flow. But you can flow when you really begin to, this for me comes out of a deep spiritual place. When you feel so intimately connected with God that you really don't worry. You're not anxious about tomorrow. You're not worried about what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat, what you're going to preach, because you're flowing with God. And in that flow, God will reveal. I'm a witness. When I stop trying to control everything and just flow with God, I love life so much more. It is not a problem. It's a blessing. It's an opportunity. Every day I wake up and say, okay, what we're going to do today, God? I'm ready. With you on my side, I can face it all. So the last thing, here's what you absolutely have to survive burnout. And this is Yeah, I think next to the last slide. Rest. Now, rest is not vegging out on the couch watching, binge watching some TV show. Rest is not home cleaning up. Rest is rest. Most of us don't know how to rest. We know how to sleep, but sleep is not necessarily rest. So we need to learn how to just sit still and do nothing. If you have a dog or a cat, observe them. They are so good at it. They just chill. You'll be surprised at how that will energize you and almost reset, recalibrate you. And then we need to be refueled. Everybody needs to check out, what internal resources do I need, particularly as things change, as something happens in the community, you encounter a difficult situation, something happens in your family. You need to ask yourself, what internal resources do I need to have? Do I need some debrief time? Do I need some better capacity to manage my own fear? Do I need someone to talk to about my worries? What internal resources? How do you refuel yourself? And then retool. What external resources do I need? Do you need somebody with expertise to come in your church and talk to your congregation about a certain thing? Do you need more information so that you can speak coherently about a subject? What external resources do you need to go find somebody who can help fix that thing instead of letting brother so-and-so keep taping it with duct tape? Retooling. Restoration. This is also one we tend to ignore, but we all need a time to be restored. And for me, restored means you review and, if necessary, revise your vision. Many of us have visions of ourselves and our capacities that have reached their expiration date. We're still trying to make it happen, but God has something else for us. And so restoration can come by letting go and letting God refill with a new vision. And then last, reconciliation. I like this word reconciliation because reconciliation for me means coming to terms with. And some of us need to come to terms with some things. And so this is where I put counseling and consultation. If you don't have a consultation partner, somebody that you can talk to about how do I deal with this? We're thinking about a capital campaign. How did you do yours? Don't feel like you got to reinvent the wheel. Ask other people. Don't be embarrassed to say you don't know. And then counseling. Dr. Brian said, get you some sessions. I say, rent you a friend. Rent a friend. Go to a counselor, therapist, somebody that you can sit with who has a little more objectivity than you because they're not in the situation, who can help you work through whatever past issues or present issues may be troubling you. This is a way to stay connected and whole through self-care. Self-care enables, for me, the ministry of hope. If there's a purpose for us existing as a church, is to convey that there is hope, to let people know that in spite of what we see, there's hope. In spite of how it feels, there's hope. In spite of what's going on, there's always hope, but you can only do that ministry of hope when you are whole yourself. And part of that wholeness enables us to do this ministry of hope because there is still work to do. I don't care if your congregation has arrived and has 3,000 members and y'all got $3 million in the bank, there's still work to do. There's still going to be some grieving mother. There's still going to be some teenager that's confused. There's still going to be some body who's got to take care of their elderly parent. There's always going to be ministry to do, and you have to be ready for it. When you do good self-care, you can invite others into the ministry. And that's part of what we are to be, a community of faith. We are not by ourselves the body of Christ, but it's about our connectedness to everyone else. And we make up the body together. It positions you to be a part of the future because guess what? If you burn out, you are not going to be good. You can't be You can't do wellness work when you are sick yourself. So self-care enables you to be part of the future. And then also self-care, for me at least, cultivates patience and persistence for the long haul. We live in a society where we want to see immediate results. But I don't know about you, I'm in this ministry for the long haul. The race is not given to the swift, but those that endure to the end. You may not get your flowers. You may not get the accolades. You may not get Pastor of the Year, but there is a crown laid up for you. If you are faithful over a few things, God will give you the blessings of eternal life. And if that is your goal, then it doesn't matter to you how long it gets there. You just need to be patient and persistent in your ministry, day by day, doing what God asks you to do. Yes. We have a little time for questions. Yeah. I can give it to Charles. You get. Did you record it? Okay. Yes, it'll be available.
Testing.
Thank you, sir.
Bishop, thank you so much for your presentation on self-care. And I realize that the goal and motive of self-care is to move from a chaotic state into a more serene state. But what advice would you offer somebody who has grown accustomed to functioning in a chaotic world? And how would you, I guess, release yourself from the unnecessary burden of operating in chaos?
Thank you. A good friend of mine, she's a spiritual guide or whatever, spiritual, what do they call it? Spiritual director. That's what she does. She talks about turtle steps. And you know, a turtle is known for moving really slow, but she really reinforces with folks when she's doing spiritual direction to start with a small goal. Because all too often, what we want to do is change everything, and that's hard to maintain. And so I would suggest just start small. If silence, for example, is something you have a hard time with, just start small. I'm going to spend 5 minutes in silence. And when that becomes comfortable, 10 minutes. And when that becomes comfortable, but you also probably want to do an assessment of the origins of your chaos and make some decisions about that. I share a lot of my personal stuff because those are my great teaching experiences. So I have a younger sister who had an addiction. She talks about it openly. And she was the source of a lot of stress for me because as the older, she would always call me and want me to fix whatever had gone wrong. So she calls me one day. I'm in Atlanta. She's in Cincinnati. She's at work. She calls me, Teresa, somebody just stole my purse at work. I'm in Atlanta. She's in Cincinnati. I said, well, baby, did you call the police? No, I thought I'd call you. I thought we got to do something about this. That's when I got caller ID. This was before cell phones. And I made a decision that when my sister called, if I was not in a frame of mind to deal with her, I would not answer. Because every time I fixed a problem, I became the go-to person, and she needed to learn how to fix some of her own problems. And so just making decisions about that. Who is the source of chaos? So, you know, there may be some folks who are constantly bringing you chaos. You may have to make some decisions and set some boundaries around that. Not that you exclude them from your life, but you set some boundaries around that. Because if my sister called and she's in chaos and I just had a cold in ER, I'm not in a frame of mind to be helpful. I'm going to probably say something that later on I'm going, oh, Lord, why did I tell her to do that? Yeah, I'll send you $1,000. No, I ain't got that to send her. Because when we're in chaos, we make chaotic decisions.